The fund would like to thank everyone who has helped the Madeleine campaign for their kindness, support and generosity. Madeleine's fund was set up to find Madeleine, support the family and bring the abductor or abductors to justice, and subject to that, help other missing children.
What began as a tragedy soon became a global cause. When 3-year-old Madeleine McCann disappeared in Portugal in 2007, the world rallied behind her family. In just days, the Madeleine's Fund, leaving no stone unturned, was born, framed as a moral mission to find a missing child and bring justice. Donations flooded in, raising millions. But nearly 2 decades later, there is no justice, no answers, and no transparency. Instead, the fund has become a symbol of privilege and manipulation. Mortgage payments, failed private detectives, legal battles to protect reputations. This is how the money was spent. Meanwhile, other missing children received no such luxury. Public anger has grown, fueled by suspicions of high-level protection and media spin. This investigation focuses on how a fund meant to serve truth may have instead shielded power, concealed failure, and betrayed the very trust it asked the world to give. 12 days. That's all it took. On May 15, 2007, less than 2 weeks after Madeleine McCann vanished from a holiday resort in Portugal, her parents, Kate and Jerry McCann, launched the Madeleine's Fund, leaving no stone unturned. It was fast, emotional, and well-branded. The fund was registered not as a charity, but as a private limited company based in London. Its stated goals were simple and noble: find Madeleine, bring her abductor to justice, and provide financial support to the family during the search. But from the very start, questions were buried beneath the surface. Why wasn't it a charity? Because UK law doesn't allow charitable status for causes focused solely on one individual. That technicality, however, became the fund's greatest shield. Without charity status, the fund wasn't subject to the same transparency rules or independent oversight. No watchdogs, no tight audits. Just a grieving family, a small circle of loyal associates, and nearly £2 million in donations flooding in. To the world, the McCanns were devastated parents, doctors, middle class, sympathetic. Their child had vanished without a trace, and they left their jobs to devote themselves fully to the search. Public sympathy turned into public generosity. The fund raised nearly £1.85 million in its first year. Money sent in from people who believed they were helping a desperate family hunt for a missing little girl. But that's not exactly where all the money went. At its core, the fund was structured like a business, not a public cause. The board of directors included Kate and Jerry themselves, along with close allies like wealthy businessman Brian Kennedy. No independent figures. No neutral watchdogs. The same people who controlled the story controlled the cash. That raised serious red flags, especially when the spending started. Mortgage payments, PR firms, failed private investigators, international trips, lawsuits to protect the McCann's image. All of it paid, at least in part, with money from the fund. Yet there was no clear path to finding Madeleine, no measurable progress, and no external body holding anyone accountable. And the fund remained just that, a fund. It was never converted into a registered charity. The McCanns promised that, if Madeleine were pounds, the remaining money would help other missing children. But that never happened. Madeleine remains missing. The fund remains active. And as of 2024, it still holds over £900,000 in the bank. For many donors, the real betrayal wasn't in how the money was used. It was in what they weren't told. Most assumed their donations were going straight toward the search. Instead, they were unknowingly financing a private operation with almost no transparency. The McCanns didn't break the law, but they bent public trust. And that's often worse. The emotional urgency of the case allowed the fund to grow quickly and without scrutiny. But the further we step back, the more disturbing it becomes. The fund wasn't built to be questioned. It was built to serve a narrative. From the polished press conferences to the high-profile legal defenses, every aspect of the fund's design kept control in the hands of the same few people, and kept critics on the outside. True crime isn't just about what happens to victims. It's also about what happens to the truth. In this case, the truth about the fund, the money, the motives, the control, was quietly sealed behind legal structures and media sympathy. And nearly 2 decades later, as the world keeps asking where Madeleine went, another question grows louder: what was this fund really protecting? At first glance, the leadership of the Madeleine's fund appeared respectable, professional, even. The board included Kate and Jerry McCann, understandably at the center, Brian Kennedy, a multi-millionaire businessman and longtime supporter, Michael Linnett, an accountant, Edward Smethurst, a lawyer, and John Corner, a media producer and family friend. On paper, they brought a mix of legal, financial, and media experience. But in practice, this configuration was anything but neutral. Every decision about how to spend the money, how much, on what, and to whom, remained under the control of people emotionally and reputationally tied to the outcome. No independent voices. No outside accountability. In any other context, this would be considered a textbook case of conflict of interest. In this case, it was simply called the fund, and the fund was massive from the start. Between 2007 and 2008 alone, it raised an astonishing £18,461.78. That included £1.4 million through traditional bank donations, £39,000 from online fundraising platforms, and another £64,000 from the sale of merchandise, bracelets, t-shirts, bumper stickers bearing Madeleine's face. But perhaps most revealing was the source of the biggest donations: power and celebrity. The News of the World handed over £205,000. So did Sir Philip Green, the British retail magnate. Simon Cowell added £5,000. Richard Branson, never one to stay far from public crisis, donated £100,000 specifically to cover the family's legal fees. J.K. Rowling and theater mogul Bill Kenwright also contributed, though the exact sums were never disclosed. This wasn't just public support, it was elite sponsorship, and with that came media insulation, legal firepower, and a narrative that was no longer allowed to be questioned. The fund's war chest didn't stop with donations. The McCanns sued, and they won. In 2008, they received £55,000 in libel damages from Express newspapers. In 2013, the Sunday Times paid out £55,000. All of it was funneled back into the fund. That money wasn't earned through progress in the investigation. It was compensation for damage to their image. By 2024, nearly 17 years after Madeleine vanished, the fund still held £9,219 in assets. A significant portion of that came not from new donations, but from residual revenue, including royalties from Kate McCann's book Madeleine, published in 2011. That book initially generated tens of thousands in annual income, peaking at £84,000 in 2018 to 2019, but in recent years, those numbers have plummeted. In the 2022 to 2023 financial year, the book brought in just £34.98. For a fund created in response to a child's disappearance, one would expect these numbers to spark hope, leads, and action. But the trail has long gone cold, and the money now sits in limbo, untied to measurable outcomes or independent reviews. No new suspects, no major breakthroughs. Just a steady stream of donations, royalties, and litigation victories flowing into a fund controlled by the very people whose decisions the public is no longer allowed to scrutinize. It is a cruel irony. The very structure that allowed the fund to raise money so quickly, celebrity endorsements, emotional urgency, media sympathy, is the same structure that made it nearly impossible to question once the dust settled. It began as a symbol of determination. It has become a symbol of control. From the very beginning, the Madeleine's fund operated in a gray zone, legally permissible, but dangerously opaque. While the fund claimed to follow the UK's Good Governance Code, it conveniently sidestepped the one structure designed to enforce real accountability, charity regulation. Because it wasn't registered as a charity, it didn't fall under the supervision of the Charity Commission. That meant no mandatory independent audits, no strict reporting requirements, and no legal obligation to disclose how donations were being spent. For a fund handling millions in public money, this was more than a loophole, it was a shield. In its first year of operation, financial details were sparse. Donors were left in the dark, no clear records, no regular updates. Only after the end of the 2007 to 2008 fiscal year did Companies House publish a full financial report. By then, the public had already started asking questions, and for good reason. That report revealed what few had expected. Some of the fund's earliest spending went to pay the McCanns' mortgage. The backlash was swift. Thousands had donated under the belief they were helping find a missing child, not funding the personal expenses of the parents. The fund's vague wording, supporting the family, became a catch-all excuse for expenditures that felt increasingly hard to justify. The McCanns later agreed to stop using the fund for personal financial support after being named official suspects in Portugal. But the damage was done. Trust had already eroded. What made things worse was the composition of the board. As previously noted, the directors were family members, close friends, and personal allies. There were no external watchdogs, no independent reviewers. Every decision stayed inside the circle. This wasn't just poor governance. It was structurally designed to avoid dissent. The lack of external oversight didn't just raise eyebrows. It laid the foundation for nearly 2 decades of controversy. From mortgage payments to PR campaigns to questionable legal battles, the fund's spending would be debated again and again. And with every passing year, the original absence of transparency would resurface as the root of public suspicion. In the world of true crime, it's not just what people do that matters, it's what they're allowed to hide. The Madeleine Fund, by design, made hiding easy. From the outside, the Madeleine Fund was a lifeline. But once the curtain was pulled back, what the public saw left many feeling deceived. Donations meant for a child's search had quietly trickled into personal comforts, failed investigations, media manipulation, and courtroom vendettas. Each expenditure told a different story, none of them about finding Madeleine. Perhaps the most incendiary revelation came early. In 2007, it was disclosed that the fund had been used to pay £2,000 per month toward 2 mortgages on the McCanns' home in Rothley, Leicestershire. At the time, both Kate and Jerry had taken unpaid leave from their medical jobs to focus on the investigation. Supporters may have sympathized, until they realized their donations weren't just going towards search efforts, but to cover the family's personal financial obligations. The backlash was immediate and severe. Donors felt betrayed. They hadn't sent in their savings, pensions, or spare change to cover someone's mortgage. They gave to bring a missing child home. While the fund did list supporting the family as one of its objectives, most believed that meant logistical or investigative support, not paying off monthly bills. Critics argued this was not only ethically wrong, but a clear misalignment of priorities, rescuing Madeleine versus preserving lifestyle. What made it worse was the timing. In September 2007, the McCanns were declared arguidos, official suspects, by Portuguese police. Within days, and under mounting pressure, the family agreed to stop using the fund for personal financial support. But the damage was irreversible. The mortgage scandal cast a long shadow over every future spending decision. In desperation, the McCanns hired Metodo 3, a private detective firm based in Spain. For 10 months, they poured £105,000 into the company's efforts. What they got in return was a string of empty leads, dubious sightings, and, ultimately, nothing. Metodo 3 made bold promises. Madeleine would be pounds by Christmas. They claimed to have underworld connections and insider knowledge. But their methods were unorthodox, their credibility questionable, and their results non-existent. In the end, even the McCanns admitted disappointment. The contract was quietly terminated. For donors, this wasn't just about failure, it was about waste. £250,000 gone. No new evidence, no arrests, no meaningful progress. The lack of due diligence in hiring Metodo 3, and the absence of independent oversight, sparked outrage. Why wasn't the fund more careful? Why weren't experts consulted? Why was a public trust funding unvetted fantasy? Another major spending category was public relations. In the early months of the investigation, the fund spent £8,1904 on media campaigns, newspaper ads, TV slots, posters plastered across Europe. It then paid an additional £1,335.73 for campaign management, which included the salary of Justine McGuinness, a temporary spokesperson. Eventually, the family brought in Clarence Mitchell, a former government PR official, to handle communications full-time. While his salary was reportedly paid by donor Brian Kennedy, the overall PR strategy became a lightning rod. Supporters initially welcomed the awareness campaign, but as the months dragged on, critics accused the PR machine of focusing more on cleaning up the McCanns' image than on advancing the case. Emotional appeals, carefully staged press conferences, legal threats against tabloids, all painted the family as the primary victims rather than keeping the spotlight on Madeleine herself. Public sentiment shifted. Was the fund being used to find a child, or to manage a reputation? The line between advocacy and spin blurred until the distinction no longer mattered. The PR blitz may have won media sympathy, but it cost the fund its moral high ground. In 2022 to 2023, the fund paid £695 in legal fees to sue Goncalo Amaral, the former Portuguese detective who had led the original investigation. Amaral had published a book, Maddie, The Truth of the Lie, in which he claimed Madeleine had died in the apartment and that her parents had staged an abduction. The McCanns sued for libel. Not only did the lawsuit fail, but the use of fund money to pursue it drew public fury. This wasn't about Madeleine, it was about silencing critics. Donors didn't fund a smear war. They funded a search. Even those who sympathized with the McCanns questioned why donations were being used to attack dissenting voices. In the eyes of many, this marked the fund's descent into private legal weaponry. The fact that Clarence Mitchell, a seasoned PR operative, was still advising the family during this period only fueled suspicions. Every move seemed less about justice and more about control. Each of these expenditures might be defensible in isolation, but together they form a pattern, a fund created in crisis, then used in ways that diverged wildly from public expectation. The problem wasn't just in the spending. It was in the silence, the absence of transparency, the refusal to allow outside scrutiny. In a case built on emotion, the fund became a mirror of everything the public feared, that power protects itself, that privilege is insulated, and that justice can be quietly suffocated by bureaucracy and spin. The question remains: how many of those pounds truly searched for Madeleine, and how many were used to protect everyone else? In cases of missing children, the public doesn't just donate money. They invest hope. When people gave to the Madeleine Fund, they weren't writing checks to strangers. They were clinging to a shared belief that truth matters and that justice, no matter how delayed, would be pursued without compromise. That belief was the real currency behind the millions. And that belief, many feel, was squandered. When reports emerged that the fund was being used for personal gain, other than what the donors had intended, something deeper than anger arose. Disillusionment. Donors, already emotionally involved, felt betrayed. Their money, meant for finding a lost child, had instead been redirected toward protecting the family's lifestyle and public image. What they saw as a sacred trust had been quietly redefined by those who controlled it. For many, the most offensive element wasn't the size of the expenditures. It was what they symbolized. Paying a mortgage while a child remains missing felt, to many, grotesquely out of touch. Suing a former detective who voiced an alternative theory felt like silencing dissent, not seeking truth. And pouring six-figure sums into media campaigns in Morocco and Spain, regions that yielded no concrete leads, looked more like reputation laundering than legitimate investigation. The emotional toll of these revelations was real. Donors described feeling used. Parents of other missing children expressed quiet outrage. Why, they asked, had this one family received so much financial and media support, only to turn it inward? In online forums and press interviews, families of victims like Ben Needham and Joanna Cipriano pointed out the stark double standard. Their own cases received no glossy posters, no international press tours, no million-pound PR budgets. Just silence. And then there was the silence from the fund itself. No clear apology, no real explanation, no acknowledgement that choices made in crisis had wounded the very community that once stood behind them. Ethically, This silence became the loudest betrayal. The fund had been positioned as a mission of justice, but acted like a fortress. True crime isn't just about what happens in the shadows. It's about the systems that fail us in the daylight. In the case of the Madeleine Fund, the real damage wasn't just financial. It was moral. A wound opened not just in the hearts of donors, but in the broader public faith that truth, transparency, and justice can still walk hand in hand. The controversy surrounding the Madeleine Fund isn't happening in isolation. Its impact, financial, ethical, and emotional, resonates even louder when placed beside other child disappearance cases that received little to no support. These comparisons aren't just uncomfortable, they are damning. They reveal a systemic inequality in how cases are treated, who receives sympathy, and who is simply left behind. To understand the scale of this disparity, one must ask, what if Madeleine hadn't been white, British, and born into a professional, middle-class family with media-savvy parents? What if her name had been Ben, Joanna, or Shannon? Ben Needham disappeared from the Greek island of Kos in 1991, at just 21 months old. His mother, Carrie Needham, fought for years to keep her son's name in the public eye. She pleaded for assistance, for recognition, for someone, anyone, in government to take her child's case seriously. But Ben's case never sparked an international movement. There was no multi-million-pound fund, no celebrity donations, no Operation Grange. When the McCann case exploded in 2007, Carrie spoke out, hesitantly, painfully. She expressed admiration for the McCanns' ability to mobilize global resources, but she also pointed to the brutal imbalance. Why had her son's life not merited the same urgency? When she compared the handling of the two cases, she was met with criticism and accusations of jealousy. Yet all she had done was highlight an obvious truth: justice should not be a popularity contest. 3 years before Madeleine disappeared, another child vanished, 8-year-old Joanna Cipriano. She lived just 16 kilometers from Praia da Luz. Her mother, Leonor Cipriano, was quickly accused and later convicted of murdering her daughter, despite the body never being found. The case was riddled with inconsistencies. Allegations of police brutality surfaced, and yet, unlike the McCanns, Leonor received no benefit of the doubt, no legal support, and no public campaign in her defense. Why the difference? Joanna came from a working-class Portuguese family, without wealth, connections, or media polish. Her mother became the convenient suspect. Her story, though similar in tragedy, lacked the political pressure and international backing that would later surround the McCanns. For many in Portugal, the contrast between Joanna and Madeleine became a symbol of class-based injustice. 2 missing girls, but only one worth protecting. When placed side by side, these cases highlight a grim truth: media coverage, government attention, and public support often follow a pattern, not of severity, but of social identity. Madeleine's case became a cause célèbre because it had all the right ingredients: a photogenic child, articulate parents, connections to power, and an emotionally resonant narrative. In contrast, Ben's family was forgotten. Joanna's was condemned. This raises a profound ethical question. Was the Madeleine Fund ever about justice for all? Or was it about preserving a particular narrative? A narrative of victimhood that only works if the victims look a certain way, live a certain way, and speak a certain way. The public doesn't want to believe that justice is selective. But these comparisons make it hard to think otherwise. The unequal treatment of these cases exposes more than a media bias. It exposes a systemic failure. For many, the Madeleine Fund became a lightning rod not just because of how it spent its money, but because of how much money it had, when others had none. It is not wrong to help grieving parents, but it is wrong to help some parents more than others, based on how comfortable their tragedy makes us feel. In true crime, the greatest silence isn't always where the body lies. Sometimes, it's in the stories that never got told. From the moment Clarence Mitchell entered the scene, the Madeleine McCann case changed tone. A former British government press officer, with ties to the Cabinet Office and the Media Monitoring Unit, Mitchell wasn't just any PR consultant. He was power's mouthpiece. installed as the official spokesperson for the McCanns. His salary was reportedly paid by Brian Kennedy, the same wealthy businessman already seated on the fund's board. The message was clear: the McCanns weren't just grieving parents. They had political, grade crisis management behind them. Mitchell's presence reframed the narrative. Gone were the raw, emotional pleas of a devastated family. In their place came tightly controlled press briefings, carefully worded statements, and a relentless campaign to steer public opinion. Critics of the investigation were painted as insensitive, Portuguese police were cast as incompetent, and alternative theories were aggressively challenged. For many, it didn't feel like a search for truth. It felt like damage control. This level of media orchestration isn't normal in missing persons cases, nor is the kind of state-sponsored commitment that would soon follow. In 2011, 4 years after Madeleine vanished, the UK government launched Operation Grange, a Scotland Yard-led reinvestigation of the case. By 2024, it had consumed more than £13.2 million found in public funds, a figure unmatched by any other child disappearance in British history. To put that in perspective, Operation Grange has cost more than the combined investigations of multiple terrorism plots and serial murder cases. This extraordinary allocation of resources, without corresponding breakthroughs, raised serious eyebrows. Why this case? Why now? And at what cost? Some pointed to political motives. The case had become an international embarrassment, with sharp tensions between British and Portuguese law enforcement. Reopening the investigation allowed the UK government to reclaim control of the narrative, reassuring the public that it was doing everything in its power. Others saw it as a PR move in itself, an expensive gesture designed to satisfy the media, soothe public outrage, and project British competence on the world stage. Either way, the message to other families was chilling. Unless your tragedy makes headlines, don't expect this kind of help. The combination of Clarence Mitchell's spin machine and Operation Grange's unprecedented budget created a sense that the McCann case wasn't being treated like other cases. Because the McCanns weren't being treated like other parents. They had media protection, they had political insulation, and increasingly, they had public suspicion. While many families of missing children struggle just to afford a poster, the McCanns operated with the kind of financial and legal firepower most could never dream of. The contrast wasn't just stark, it was disturbing. And the spending didn't stop at legal fees. The fund also covered international campaign trips, high-profile appearances in Madrid, Amsterdam, Berlin, Washington, D.C., and Rabat. These weren't cheap visits. They were strategic media engagements, designed to keep Madeleine's name in the headlines and the family at the center of global sympathy. But again, these opportunities were never available to families like the Needhams or the Ciprianas, who watched from the sidelines as one case received a platform while theirs faded into obscurity. This level of mobility, legal, political, and geographic, was unprecedented. And for many observers, it raised a troubling question. Was the McCann case being elevated because of the facts, or because of who they were and who they knew? It's not just about having more money. It's about what money makes possible: elite PR teams, international influence, courtroom victories, and unchallenged access to government officials. For other families, justice is a maze. For the McCanns, it often seemed like a red carpet. That disparity has fed years of resentment and suspicion. Not necessarily toward the McCanns as individuals, but toward the system that seems to bend around them. When justice becomes a function of visibility and privilege, the public starts to wonder, is the game rigged before it even begins? In the world of high-profile disappearances, money talks, but influence whispers louder. The Madeleine McCann case wasn't just fueled by public donations, it was elevated by the endorsement and funding of some of Britain's most powerful names. This wasn't grassroots charity, it was elite backing. And it changed everything. But prestige comes with strings. As the money flowed, so did suspicions. Critics began to ask, were these donations purely charitable, or were they strategic? After all, funding the McCanns didn't just help a family. It helped shape the narrative. It cast the McCanns as the ideal victims. Respectable, educated, middle class, and now endorsed by celebrities. This was a carefully curated image, reinforced by a PR machine and financed by those with reputations to maintain. Donating wasn't just generosity, it was optics. In the UK's tightly interwoven world of media, politics, and wealth, perception management is a currency of its own. The McCanns weren't just clients of PR firms. They were symbols of British resilience, of family under siege. Helping them meant aligning with a cause the public had been trained to accept as righteous and untouchable. And for corporations and public figures constantly navigating public opinion, there was value in that alignment. Some went further, suggesting these influential donors weren't just propping up the McCanns. They were indirectly steering the investigation's tone. While there is no concrete evidence that these figures interfered with police work, their financial power undeniably insulated the family from the level of scrutiny that typically surrounds suspects in similar cases. Media outlets softened coverage. Critics were branded cruel. Dissenting voices, including those of Portuguese investigators, were drowned out or dismissed outright. And in the background, the optics benefited not just the McCanns, but the British government. The image of the UK actively supporting one of its own. Parents who did everything right, played well on the world stage. It became a diplomatic narrative. This is how we care for our citizens. These dynamics don't prove corruption, but they raise a troubling question: how much justice is shaped by money, and how much by media choreography? When powerful voices rally behind a single case, they may believe they're helping, but sometimes their influence narrows the lens so tightly that everything else, and everyone else, disappears from view. In September 2007, more than 4 months after the disappearance of 3-year-old Madeleine McCann, her parents, Kate and Gerry McCann, were formally declared orgados by the Portuguese police. The designation shocked the public and intensified scrutiny on a case already saturated with global attention. But what led to such a serious move against 2 grieving parents? At the heart of the suspicion was a forensic controversy that would later divide experts and damage public trust. The Portuguese PJ based their suspicions primarily on DNA evidence allegedly found in a car the McCanns rented 24 days after Madeleine disappeared. A sample taken from the car's trunk was said to contain 15 out of 19 DNA markers consistent with Madeleine's profile. Though initially seen as a potential breakthrough, the UK's FSS later evaluated the evidence as too complex to interpret meaningfully. In forensic terms, this meant the sample could not definitively be tied to Madeleine, nor could it be excluded. Nevertheless, the PJ regarded the finding as a critical lead and used it to bolster their theory that Madeleine may have died in the apartment, and that her body was later moved using the rental car. Compounding the suspicions was Kate McCann's decision to decline answering 48 questions during an 11-hour police interview in early September 2007. Her silence, though legally permissible, added to the growing unease among investigators and fueled tabloid speculation. In contrast, Gerry McCann responded to all questions posed by authorities. To the PJ, the refusal suggested possible guilt, even though legal counsel had advised silence due to the nature of the questioning. Despite the media frenzy and heightened public attention, the case against the McCanns failed to materialize in any substantial way. In July 2008, Portuguese prosecutors officially lifted the arguido status of both Kate and Gerry McCann, citing a complete lack of conclusive evidence. In subsequent years, both the UK police and major media outlets affirmed there was no credible reason to believe the parents were involved in their daughter's disappearance. The media's role in shaping public perception was far from neutral. In the early stages, British tabloids fueled public suspicion by highlighting minor behavioral details, such as Kate McCann's lack of visible tears during televised appeals, as indicative of potential guilt. These narratives drew on harmful stereotypes about how grieving mothers should behave, often ignoring the immense psychological toll such a tragedy could exact. The tide began to turn when the McCanns launched a series of defamation lawsuits. In 2008, they were awarded £505,000 from Express newspapers for a series of false and defamatory articles. 5 years later, they secured another £55,000 from the Sunday Times. These legal victories underscored how misleading press coverage had compounded their suffering and influenced public opinion. As skepticism shifted to sympathy, the UK government also moved to protect the McCanns. Remarkably, within hours of Madeleine's disappearance, the British Embassy in Lisbon was in contact with Portuguese authorities. The Foreign Office assigned officials to support the family, a level of diplomatic involvement that stood in stark contrast to the handling of other missing child cases involving British citizens abroad. In 2011, the British government took its most significant step by launching Operation Grange, a high-profile investigation led by the Metropolitan Police. To date, the operation has cost over £13.2 million, a sum unmatched in any similar missing child case in the UK. Officially, the aim was to review and re-investigate the circumstances of Madeleine's disappearance. Unofficially, critics argued the move was also designed to restore public faith in the justice system and protect national image. Some observers went further, suggesting the UK had applied diplomatic pressure on Portugal to lift the McCanns' arguido status in 2008 despite no new exonerating evidence. In October 2023, after 16 years of ambiguity, the PJ made a rare public apology to the McCann family. They admitted that the original investigation had been mishandled in several critical areas. The apology acknowledged key failures: failure to secure the crime scene promptly, failure to prioritize missing child protocols, and failure to consider adequately the McCann's status as foreigners navigating an unfamiliar justice system. The apology marked the first formal recognition of institutional error by Portuguese authorities in the McCann case. While some praised the move as a step toward reconciliation, others questioned its timing and effectiveness. After all, the apology did little to alter the investigation's trajectory, which has remained largely stagnant. Public confidence, already shaken by years of perceived missteps and media bias, remained low. Even with the lifting of their arguido status in 2008, Kate and Gerry McCann have continued to live under the shadow of suspicion. The 2023 apology may have provided emotional relief, but it could not undo the damage caused by years of public scrutiny, judicial ambiguity, and inconsistent law enforcement narratives. The failure to fully exonerate them in the eyes of the global public underscores a larger issue: the difficulty of achieving justice and clarity in cases where media, politics, and forensic uncertainty collide. As the case stands, the McCanns are no longer suspects, but they are also not free from judgment. Their experience exposes deep fissures in international cooperation, media ethics, and forensic interpretation. More importantly, it highlights the enduring cost of unresolved suspicion in the absence of definitive truth. And for a family that began this journey seeking answers, the burden of doubt remains one of its most enduring injustices. In the annals of modern true crime, few cases have captured public attention with as much intensity and persistence as the disappearance of Madeleine McCann. Yet behind the tabloid headlines and emotional appeals lies a deeper, more uncomfortable truth. The line between public absolution and legal exoneration is not only blurred, but often deliberately distorted. In the case of Kate and Gerry McCann, the parents of the missing child, this blurred boundary has created a lingering gray zone, one where suspicion was never fully extinguished by facts, but rather overwritten by perception. When Kate and Gerry McCann were officially declared arguidos by Portuguese police, the decision was based on circumstantial and inconclusive forensic evidence, including a DNA sample found in the trunk of a rental car, which some experts believed bore partial similarities to Madeleine's genetic profile. The British Forensic Science Service later dismissed the sample as too complex to interpret meaningfully. However, this did not prevent the Portuguese authorities from pressing forward with their theory that the child had died in the apartment and that her body had been moved. Adding to the suspicion, Kate McCann declined to answer 48 questions during an 11-hour police interrogation. Though this was her legal right, her silence contrasted with Jerry's full cooperation and was portrayed by the media as evasive. The resulting storm of public opinion pushed the couple into the eye of a global media hurricane. Speculative headlines and amateur theories filled pages, blurring the boundary between journalistic inquiry and character assassination. Yet, by July 2008, the McCanns' status as arguidos was lifted due to a lack of sufficient evidence. Importantly, this was not a declaration of innocence. No formal mechanism cleared them of involvement. The legal system simply stepped back, unable to proceed but also unwilling or unable to fully close the matter. In the absence of legal closure, a void emerged, one that was quickly filled by a powerful PR strategy and a willing media apparatus. What followed was a remarkable pivot in public perception. Through the efforts of Clarence Mitchell, the family rebranded themselves from potential suspects to symbolic victims of institutional failure and media cruelty. Media outlets that had once fueled suspicion now issued apologies and settlements. Express newspapers paid £55,000 in damages for defamatory coverage. The Sunday Times followed suit with a £505,000 payout in 2013. These legal victories against the press served a dual purpose, protecting the family's reputation and signaling to the public that the tide had turned. But here lies the central paradox. While the McCanns were increasingly portrayed as blameless in the court of public opinion, they were never formally exonerated in a court of law. This discrepancy has contributed to an enduring sense of ambiguity that continues to polarize opinion. In effect, the media had closed the case, but the legal system had not. This phenomenon, where media narratives usurp the authority of legal verdicts, raises troubling questions. What happens when a media-driven consensus substitutes for judicial clarity? In the case of the McCanns, this dynamic created a form of extrajudicial rehabilitation. They were granted a kind of social forgiveness, even as the official record remained open-ended. Such a dynamic is not without consequences. For the McCanns, the lack of formal exoneration means the shadow of doubt still looms. For their critics, it means their questions feel unanswered, their concerns unacknowledged. For the legal system, it represents a failure to assert its primacy in delivering justice, a space it ceded to headlines and PR consultants. Moreover, the psychological toll of this ambiguity should not be underestimated. In criminal justice, clarity matters. Victims, families, and the public need finality, whether in the form of a conviction, acquittal, or well-substantiated closure. When the media steps in to provide that finality without legal basis, it not only undermines institutional credibility, but also destabilizes the emotional lives of those involved. The McCanns may have been rescued from public vilification by the press, but they were never rescued from the uncertainty that the legal system left unresolved. Critically, this case illustrates how media influence can distort the balance of justice. The press is not bound by evidentiary standards. It can pivot its narrative for commercial or political reasons. It can rehabilitate as easily as it can condemn. But when media narratives become the de facto resolution to legal matters, society loses something vital: a shared, factual understanding of truth. There are also broader implications for future cases. If public relations campaigns can effectively overwrite legal ambiguity, will we come to expect every family involved in a high-profile case to hire a spokesperson? Will justice become accessible only to those who can afford media management? And will the public continue to conflate good storytelling with exonerating truth? In the end, the McCann case is a cautionary tale, not just about a child lost, but about the mechanisms through which society processes guilt and innocence. It reveals how narratives are constructed, contested, and sometimes concluded outside the bounds of the courtroom. Kate and Jerry McCann may never face formal charges, and they may never receive a legal declaration of innocence. But in the eyes of much of the public, shaped by media framing and emotional appeal, they have already been forgiven. Forgiven, yes, but never formally cleared. And in that gap between perception and procedure lies a haunting silence. The silence of a case unresolved, and a justice system that allowed its authority to be replaced by headlines In light of the long-standing controversy surrounding the Madeleine McCann case, growing attention has turned not only to the investigation itself, but also to the financial mechanisms behind it. One of the most contentious aspects has been the management of Madeleine's fund, leaving no stone unturned, a private non-profit company established just 12 days after Madeleine's disappearance. While intended as a resource to support the search for the missing child, the fund's legal structure and financial oversight have sparked serious concerns about transparency, accountability, and ethical governance. From its inception, Madeleine's fund was set up as a non-charitable limited company, rather than a registered charity. This distinction is critical, because the fund focused on a single individual rather than a broader public interest. It did not qualify for charitable status under UK law. As a result, it was not subject to oversight by the Charity Commission, the national body responsible for regulating charitable organizations in the United Kingdom. Without this layer of scrutiny, the fund operated under less stringent reporting requirements and fewer checks on how its resources were allocated. Even more concerning was the composition of the fund's board. Kate and Jerry McCann, the parents of Madeleine, sat on the board alongside close friends and personal acquaintances. While their emotional investment in the case is understandable, the lack of independence in the board's structure raised red flags about potential conflicts of interest. Decisions regarding the disbursement of funds were made internally, with minimal external oversight, leaving ample room for ethical ambiguity. These concerns were compounded by the fund's opaque financial reporting in its early months. During its first year of operation in 2007, there was no detailed public accounting of how donations were spent. It wasn't until the close of the 2007 to 2008 fiscal year that the fund released its financial reports to Companies House. By that time, it had already spent large sums on private investigators, legal fees, public relations campaigns, and even payments toward the McCanns' mortgage. For many donors and observers, the delayed transparency undermined confidence in the fund's integrity. In response to these issues, several key reforms have been proposed to improve the management of individualized private funds, particularly those associated with missing persons or criminal investigations. First and foremost, legislation should be introduced to set clearer limits on the permissible uses of funds in such cases. Donations intended to support investigations should not be used for personal expenses unrelated to the direct search, such as mortgage payments or reputational lawsuits. Second, these funds should be required to publish detailed financial reports on a quarterly basis. Each report should itemize income, expenditures, and the purpose of each transaction. This level of financial disclosure would help restore public trust and allow contributors to verify that their donations are being used appropriately. Third, the governance structure of these funds must be reformed to include an independent oversight body. Boards should not consist solely of family members or close associates of the beneficiaries. Instead, independent financial auditors, legal advisors, and public interest representatives should be appointed to ensure objective decision-making and to guard against misuse of funds. Lastly, even when a fund does not qualify as a registered charity, it should still be held to similar standards of transparency and public accountability. The creation of a new regulatory category for public interest private funds could serve this purpose, ensuring they are subject to formal oversight, even if they fall outside traditional charity definitions. Such reforms are not just about regulatory compliance. They are about maintaining public confidence in the integrity of grassroots efforts to support justice and humanitarian causes. Alongside financial reform, structural changes in the investigation process are also urgently needed. The McCann case, which has spanned nearly 2 decades, has been characterized by fragmented communication and poor coordination between the Portuguese, British, and German authorities. The lack of a unified approach has led to missed opportunities, conflicting narratives, and public confusion. Further complicating matters is the role of international politics and prosecutorial opacity. In recent years, German prosecutors have identified Christian Bruckner as the prime suspect in the case. Yet, despite dramatic public statements suggesting they possess evidence that Madeleine is deceased and that Brueckner was responsible, they have refused to disclose the nature of that evidence. This refusal has only deepened skepticism and fueled conspiracy theories, with critics alleging that political and diplomatic interests may be influencing the handling of the investigation. Operation Grange, the British investigation launched in 2011, has also come under criticism. With over £13.2 million in funding spent, and no breakthrough results to date, many citizens have questioned whether such a vast investment has been warranted or effectively managed. The lack of meaningful progress has undermined confidence in the justice system's ability to resolve the case and to collaborate internationally. To address these failings, there have been strong calls for the establishment of an independent international investigative commission. This commission would not be beholden to any one nation, state, or subject to political pressures. Instead, it would consist of experts from neutral countries such as Sweden, Canada, or Australia. These professionals, including forensic analysts, criminal investigators, and human rights attorneys, would bring an unbiased perspective to the case. Such a commission should be granted full access to all existing evidence and documentation, including forensic samples, phone records, and case files from both Operation Grange and the Portuguese Polícia Judiciária. By reviewing this material through a new lens, the Commission could identify overlooked leads or reinterpret existing data with greater scientific accuracy. Moreover, the use of advanced technologies should be integral to this renewed investigation. DNA samples collected in 2007 that were previously deemed inconclusive should be re-analyzed using modern forensic techniques that offer higher sensitivity and reliability. Additionally, artificial intelligence could be employed to analyze behavioral patterns, travel data, and communication logs from the time of the disappearance. This analytical power could unearth correlations or anomalies that were missed during manual reviews. In conclusion, the McCann case has highlighted systemic failures, not just in criminal investigation, but in financial accountability and intergovernmental coordination. Reforming how individualized funds are governed and creating an independent investigative body are not only logical responses to these failures, but moral imperatives. Without such changes, future cases may fall into the same traps, where justice is delayed, public trust is eroded, and the truth remains elusive. One of the most troubling aspects of the Madeleine McCann case is not just its tragic nature, but its seemingly endless timeline. Nearly 2 decades have passed since Madeleine's disappearance, yet the investigation continues without a clearly defined timeframe or endpoint. This absence of structure has fostered a growing sense of futility among the public. With each passing year and every additional wave of funding, trust in the system diminishes. Many now view the inquiry as a bottomless effort, perpetually open, yet producing few tangible results. To restore public confidence and reinforce the principles of transparency and accountability, a clear framework for reporting investigative progress must be established. Authorities should be required to publish quarterly updates detailing key developments. These updates should include a summary of leads that have been pursued, any suspects currently under surveillance or evaluation, and any major technical or legal challenges that are impeding progress. Crucially, these updates must be made available to the global public through a neutral and universally accessible platform, such as the Interpol website or an independently managed online portal. Equally important is the introduction of a formal time limit for investigations of this scale and visibility. A maximum duration of 2 to 3 years should be set for active investigation phases, after which the case must either be resolved, transition to a cold case status, or publicly declared as having reached a legal impasse. In the latter scenarios, authorities must provide a detailed explanation outlining why the case could not be concluded, what specific barriers prevented closure, and whether future investigative options remain open. This approach not only brings clarity to the legal status of the case, but also helps dispel the fog of conspiracy theories and institutional mistrust that often thrive in the absence of clear communication. Without these reforms, prolonged investigations risk becoming self-perpetuating cycles, fueled by public funding but lacking strategic benchmarks. By implementing regular disclosures and establishing a finite timeline, law enforcement agencies can reinforce the integrity of their efforts, while also offering closure to a global audience still awaiting answers. The disappearance of Madeleine McCann sparked one of the most extensive, costly, and emotionally charged investigations in modern criminal history. But as the years passed and the facts became increasingly obscured by speculation, a deeper and more troubling narrative emerged, a story of imbalance, selective justice, and the invisible influence of privilege. At the core of the McCann case lies not only a missing child, but a cautionary tale about how wealth, class, and political influence can bend the very systems designed to be impartial. From the outset, Kate and Jerry McCann benefited from resources and protections unavailable to most families in similar situations. As two white, middle-class doctors, they were immediately embraced by the media as sympathetic victims. The British government intervened diplomatically within hours of Madeleine's disappearance, an extraordinary move that reflected the couple's social status and political connections. Their access to legal counsel, public relations professionals, and private investigators positioned them far ahead of countless others who have searched for missing loved ones with nothing more than hope and determination. Operation Grange, the official British investigation into Madeleine's disappearance, became a symbol of this extraordinary support. With over £13.2 million in public funding and more than a decade of work, it remains one of the most expensive investigations in UK history. Yet, in all that time, it has failed to deliver a definitive resolution. Meanwhile, thousands of other missing person cases languish in silence, their files gathering dust, their families given little more than sympathetic words, and the bare minimum of institutional support. The McCann case drew attention to a dangerous precedent: that the pursuit of justice can be amplified or suppressed based on public relations strategies, media appeal, and political interests. The sheer amount of resources funneled into a single case, while others receive none, signals a deeply unequal system. This is not to suggest that the McCanns did not deserve support, but rather to question why others did not receive the same. Ben Needham, who vanished in 1991 on the Greek island of Kos, was also a British child. His family, however, received minimal government backing, no international PR campaigns, and no multi-million-pound investigations. The contrast is stark. Similarly, Joana Cipriano, a Portuguese girl who disappeared just a few miles from Praia da Luz, never had a chance at media sympathy. Her mother, Leonor, was convicted in a case riddled with inconsistencies and alleged police abuse. She had no access to lawyers or spokespeople, no national campaigns pleading for justice. Her statement, "The only difference between our family and the McCanns is that we don't have money," is both heartbreaking and illuminating. Even the handling of evidence in the McCann case reflected this imbalance. DNA evidence found in the family's rental car, reportedly matching Madeleine's genetic profile, was ultimately dismissed as inconclusive. Kate McCann's refusal to answer 48 police questions during interrogation was rationalized, not scrutinized. These are actions that might have been damning for a less affluent or well-connected family. But in the McCann's case, they were forgiven by public opinion long before the justice system had its say. The conclusion is difficult, but necessary. Justice in the McCann case did not operate in a vacuum. It moved within a system that responded more readily to status than to substance. It was shaped not only by investigative leads and forensic data, but by press conferences, diplomatic influence, and carefully crafted media narratives. And this, ultimately, is where the greatest injustice lies. True justice cannot be reserved for those with influence. It cannot be bought with connections or earned through social status. It must be blind to privilege, impartial in its pursuit, and accessible to all, regardless of background. When justice is perceived to be selective, its legitimacy erodes. When the system appears to favor some and forget others, it loses the trust of the people it is meant to serve. The McCann case should serve as a turning point, not a template. It must prompt hard questions about who gets to be heard, whose suffering is validated, and why some lives seem to matter more than others in the public eye. The answer cannot rest on appearance, profession, or the ability to hire a spokesperson. We must advocate for reforms that prioritize transparency, equality, and accountability. All families searching for missing loved ones deserve the same level of attention, the same resources, and the same institutional commitment. Only then can we begin to repair the credibility of a system that, for too long, has been influenced by privilege. Justice, by its very nature, must not only be done, but be seen to be done. And in a world where perception often outweighs truth, we must ensure that justice is not just for the powerful, but for all. Because if justice depends on privilege, then it is not justice at all,